Welcome to Florida, baby.
Introducing Dr. Narco Longo.
You're such a Taurus.
All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. We're here. And we're recording, so what's up?
Howdy. So, Juan and I are joined today by my new friend, Analog, who basically goes as deep as you can as far as finding old articles, old texts, excerpts of old writing, basically confirming most of these old world suspicions that people are having. And he's sent me a ton of stuff just in regard to what I've been looking into in Florida. So I just thought we'd flip through some of that stuff. And yeah. You want to introduce yourself, Analog? Just a little bit.
Yeah, I go by Analog, but my name's Benjamin.
Okay.
I've been in this space for, I don't know, I hate to use the word this space, but, reset, historical fuckery, narrative changes for quite a few years. In 2007, I had a motorcycle accident and had an out-of-body experience, and spent the next year or so recovering and reading pretty much religiously, trying to figure out what it was that I experienced. And here we are, essentially. I haven't stopped reading since. So, wow. Yeah.
All right. So I thought we would start off with some of Phoenician, Atlantis, kind of tie it all into Florida to start off with.
But yeah, I'll just start on this article. Basically, this whole thread is about Florida and Mexico, and what was Florida and Mexico before the late 1700s. And just click on these. It's pretty small. That's pretty small, but you get the idea, right? These are old maps.
Can you control and scroll in so it makes it bigger? There you go.
So you look at that. I didn't even know how to do that. It's embarrassing. But yeah, you get the idea. So anyone that's read enough about Atlantis, you can already kind of see the vibes here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Tenochtitlan was a city before Ponce de Leon arrived. Mm-hmm. Although he didn't go to this part of Mexico, before Cortez. And as someone who's studied Florida like yourself, Longo, and you've probably seen some old pictures of Tenochtitlan, but it was described as the Venice of Mexico.
Right.
All the streets were paved. All the buildings were hewn stone.
Mm-hmm.
The ships traveling in here were monstrous. I unfortunately couldn't find the map, but I have an old map where all of the outer cities here are star forts.
Right.
So, and then not only that, but I will get into the article a little farther down, but Atlantis is a comes from two phrases that are Spanish, which again, you can trace all the Spanish roots to Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
Arabic's kind of like this foundation that's been lost. A lot of these old articles will describe the Native Americans and their Hebraic relations, but really Hebrew is just Arabic.
Okay.
And Latin
Right.
is just inverted Arabic.
Okay.
So if you freehand Arabic and you literally just flip it, there's Latin.
Wow.
So the inversions
So
of
true.
Rome become pretty obvious, and the
Yeah.
covering stuff that you've talked about with Florida, and it goes into Mexico, and it goes all across America, from Alaska to Florida. Alaska is an Arabic word. Alaska is just like Alabama.
Everything, you're right. Every al, pretty much.
Yeah.
Al, or even els, or atolls.
Exactly. And the natives of Alaska, they have Arabic names, and their bone carving is very Arabic. And you can find Arabic coins in Alaska. I sent you that article about that petrified ship they found in Alaska in the 1800s, 1,200 feet long ship.
Yep.
I mean, anyway,
So-
we'll get back on track here. Go ahead.
Can I just wanted to give you, that's a very interesting take, because I've always said that this kind of Phoenician or Finnish first runic language, right?
Mhm.
Runic would also be Punic,
Yeah, of course.
right? So you have Phoenician and Finnish, Punic and Runic. You have those two, and I've always said that is like the masculine standardized text.
Straight lines.
That was like the mercantile
Yes.
language that was interphased. Wherever they went, they could teach it to anybody because it's a phonetic language. So they could teach it on the spot to anybody that was smart enough to learn. And like you're saying, the script seemed to, in my opinion, and Arabic is almost always in script, right?
Mhm. And very elegant.
It's feminine. It's
Yeah.
clearly feminine in
Very.
nature. So I would wager this is almost more like it's, how would I say it? It's almost like endearing language. It's not official business. It would be religious terminology. It would
100%.
be musical terminology. It would be poetic, right? And we have lost that. And it's almost like they're trying to take that away from us, where we only have one form of expression with language. Because people say, oh, is English bad? Is spelling bad? Well, it can't be bad. It's just that we're missing the complete other half, the script. We stopped learning cursive. And what is cursive? Cursive, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like, like he was speaking of with grimoires and stuff, that, grammar is just the grimoire and spelling is just what you're casting. This probably something we won't go too deep into here, but going back with what I was saying about having a pretty big obsession with language, and phonetics is part of that. But when you take it to an alchemical level, right, you start thinking about you're spelling your grimoire into the ether, and the ether, and this goes into thought forms and egregores. That why social media is so important is because it steers that ether, what's being projected into the ether, which essentially is, we're in a system where we're co-creating everything, and steering the mass consciousness is key, because that's essentially how you're going to produce the future. And yeah, what you're saying is I agree with completely. All of the Arabic poets basically said that all the gods are poets, that the original gods were poets, and it's all Arabic. And the way you're saying, and I agree with completely, that phonetics and Phoenicia, where people get it twisted. In that article that I first sent you, where you were joking around about how you didn't have time to read a whole article, that was from a group of people that basically went on to become like your Shriners. but it was a different name in the 1800s.
Right.
And that article was just describing how everyone has it wrong and what Phoenicia really was. Phoenicia was a secret society of merchants.
Mm-hmm.
So what you said, I agree with completely. Phonetics
Right.
is created language that merchants used to become more efficient trading throughout the world. So, and in there, and what they were saying in this article was that, and this is great because we'll get into the Q thing a little bit. In this article, what they were saying was that it's a secret society and that there were ranks, and you didn't get a ship and you didn't become a captain until you reached the highest level, which was called the Q. So the highest rank in the Phoenician order was Q. And what that was, it was called the eye of the needle. So you can see the Q with the eye or the slash.
Right, like an egg getting fertilized almost.
And what else? A compass.
Okay.
And what moves a compass? Magnetism.
Mm-hmm.
Magnetism is everything. We'll get into this a little bit in this article. Lodestones, bend stones, whatever you want to call them. You had one in your article or your video. It was sitting in the water, I think in Tampa.
Yeah, and Omphalos stone
Thank you.
is what
Right.
I was calling it.
Yeah. Every culture has a different name for it.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all lodestones. Meteorite, aerolite,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call them. But every religious culture worshipped them. They were living entities. Where was I? I apologize.
Well, and it's almost like they held up the sky, and they assisted in keeping the seasons temperate, and
Oh man,
that's how I've always looked at it. Is like there's the Mount Meru
Oh man,
at the center. That's the Atlas stone that's keeping the sky even, and we might not be so even right now, basically, because we've knocked all the fucking stones over and thrown them away, and now we're in the wobble, the 66.6 degree wobble.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I love it. Yeah, I have articles on this, but that's perfect jumping off point because. So going back to what we were talking about with trees, right, and how they planted trees on top of graves. So in China, they had a similar, and Japan, they had a similar belief. But what did they do? They didn't plant a tree. They built a pagoda.
Hmm.
And in the pagoda, they had giant pearls and porcelain and magnets. So lodestones, porcelain, and pearls, like giant pearls. We're talking huge bowling ball sized pearls. So you can imagine the size of the clam to make a bowling ball sized pearl. And the religion or the belief, right, of feng shui comes from the same group of people. And how do they describe it? They said what you just said. They said it created peace, tranquility, and perfect seasons. And it steered away storms.
Mm-hmm.
Just like what you said. So yeah, I agree. And magnetism, I'm a big fan of astrotheology, and I'm spacing his name, which is embarrassing, but I know you don't know.
Santos.
Yeah. Santos. Yeah. And what is a toroid? All is the torus, and it's all magnetism. And in the 1700s, they were doing all these crazy experiments on aerolites. And it was really nuts. Basically, they were saying that the same thing that creates intellect and thought and consciousness is exactly the same thing that creates the lodestone or the magnetic stone. The needle, the obelisk in New York, Central Park, in the 1800s, a writer deciphered it. And he said that it tells the story that the Egyptians came here to our realm on a lodestone and landed in Mexico.
Whoa, what?
Wow. So
or Florida.
okay, if I can jump in here, I wanted to say this earlier when you're showing the ringland around Teotitlan.
Yeah,
How do you say it?
Tenochtitlan. It's Mexico City.
Yeah, you have the biggest giveaway that the Atlantis area was the Gulf of Mexico is probably that the Gulf of Mexico was pretty much like a ring, a perfect bay, with Florida being the breakwater. Florida was the breakwater to the bay, to the inlet, and it had
It
this
makes it cute.
this perfect in exactly the Straits of Florida coming in with that warm Gulf Stream that pretty much fertilizes the world. Especially during the resets. That's the stream of life. It's almost like the umbilical cord of the planet, right? That
Absolutely.
hot water that keeps everything alive. And you have the Chicxulub crater.
Yeah.
Chicxulub, I don't know how to say it.
I
But
can't either.
You're almost right. Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
so that pretty much is one of the biggest impact craters, oldest, biggest, that they believe may even, they say might be the one that took out the dinosaurs. I don't know what else they say about it. But you have that landing down right there on the tip of the Yucatan. The Maya were allegedly restricted to the Yucatan, which is so silly to swallow that story, because it doesn't make sense. Florida probably came down a lot more. The Yucatan probably came up a bit higher, and of course the sea levels were probably lower, right? So you have this perfect bay, which you may have even had another circle within a circle inside of.
Definitely.
So it makes complete sense.
Yeah, and like I've been postulating to you, I believe that the Yucatan and Florida are completely man-made. So I think that this is your Atlantis. I mean, you've talked enough about this. Having someone that knows what limestone really is half the battle. You can't really talk about biogeology with someone who really doesn't have some grasp on geology. And as soon as they do, you really can poke holes on a lot of things. And Florida is one of them, and the Yucatan is one of them. Geologists in the 1800s were saying this is the weirdest place. It's like totally flat. Only specific things are growing here. It almost seems like there was like a seed vault released, because it's growing very distinct things that are not found anywhere else in the world, just like Florida.
Or like Madagascar is almost like
Madagascar is the same thing. It's limestone.
Lemuria.
It's flat with a few man-made mounds.
With all the kapok trees.
Exactly. And the
Giant,
trees, as we've talked about, are everything. Knowing your trees, it's like Ogum. Knowing your trees, knowing your language, you start to really can decipher this stuff. Like history starts to make a lot more sense, especially when you're looking at it, like you were saying, from a feminine mother culture aspect, where we've gotten completely, on the other end of the spectrum now. And this is, I hope at the end of this, someone can go watch the movie Avatar and really kind of get an idea of what we're really dealing with. Avatar is probably much closer to what the world was like during Atlantis, quote unquote, again.
Or Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, I have some articles that elaborate on that further. America's crisscrossed with giant walls, just like China. And there's an article in the 1800s. Go ahead, jump in.
Can I add real quick, because you really blew my mind with that stone. The reason I brought this up is because you mentioned Narco mentioned how this might have been closer over here. If you look, I mean, it could have been closer. If this wasn't underwater, it would be like how they say you could see Cuba from the tip of Florida, or Key West. You could see Cuba. Well, the same thing. If they would have been out here, they could have seen the whatever this was.
Pretty much
could have potentially been more land. So 100% that's possible. And the whole stone thing, you blew my mind with it, because I don't know what role mountains play into it, but the ziggurats, right? They were emulating the mountains. It was all about the and I think you mentioned something about the mountains earlier, Longo, but you guys are going all over the place. I'm trying to keep up. But the emulation of mountains, because it was holy, right? It was a sacred thing for them. So that's why they made these structures. And it makes me think if they were trying to emulate these huge trees and all these things that you guys are talking about.
Almost like prosthetics, where this post-reset civilization is doing the best they can to, repair the network And if that means a fucking 2,000-year-old tree's gone and you have to replace it with a marble tower, well, maybe that's what they do. And it's like
100%.
a
Towers
prosthetic.
serve the same purpose. Absolutely.
We were talking about the in the bookstore, the show we did, basically about phantom limb syndrome, and how that is like a crucial kind of attitude that they have in masonry or Freemasonry, where a building has a kind of like an etheric exoskeleton.
Yeah,
right?
Photograph. Everything is living, even when it's gone.
Exactly. So when the buildings are gone, there's a need, there's a void, a vacuum, and it has to be filled. And that's why you'd see some cultures just fucking piling up shell the best they can, because they're just doing the best they can. Whereas a more capable society might erect, a Tower of Babel or something like that.
And what you're saying is where I got that from was from this book, G.L. Hersey. He's one of my favorite authors. And Pythagorean palaces, it's just that where they tried to emulate this higher dimension within this architecture. So everybody focuses on how magnificent the architecture is and how are they able to do it and all this. I want to know the purpose of that architecture for it being that way. I believe that these buildings, especially during the Renaissance era, they were used as talismans. We're talking about the astrological alignments. These ziggurats were placed in certain places in order to invoke these energies from the astral plane or whatever it is, the celestial bodies, the same way that they use these type of buildings to do the same thing. They were used as talismans to invoke certain energies or something, and it goes back to the whole Freemasonic thing of Hiram, what's his name?
Hiram
Abiff, that guy, where you have Solomon in there. They revere Pythagoras a lot because again, it's all about the building, but not only building the physical building with the masonry, but the astral, what I call astral buildings or the cosmic architecture, whatever you want to refer to it as, but the architecture in this other realm that they try to emulate. Again, it goes back to as above, so below, because they're trying to emulate that more divine dimension, if you will. That more, they say that at least the Neoplatonics, they were talking about how this realm is a reflection of a more perfect realm. So this one is the theory of forms and all that good stuff. But that's what really makes my nipples hard when you start talking about like interdimensional stuff and emulating and encapsulating higher levels of consciousness within these buildings, and only the initiate is able to see it, right? That's why I tell people, Fulcanelli talked about it, where these cathedrals were alchemical writings, alchemical texts. They were using the pictures to talk to people, but only the initiated were able to see it. If you aren't initiated, then you can't understand the language. It's literally an entire different language when you learn the symbolism. And I think that's one of the most important things when it comes to all this. And architecture is important when it comes to magical purposes. So,
yeah, 100%.
Speaking of language, let's get into some of these articles.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Trying to be as organic as we can here. Yeah, everything is etheric, and this is why, going back to what you're saying about the feminine being lost, alchemy is about transmutation, but it's not about being rich. Obviously, I'm sure you guys can see past that whole thing, but it is about the ether. So you just talked about King Solomon. Well, who did King Solomon hire? When things were out of his reach as far as things he was capable of, he went to the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians are your Masons. Remember, the first secret society was Phoenicia. It's not a race of a group of people. It's a collection of minds. Think of it like the Library of Alexandria, right? Everyone came here to that, and it takes you to the Q again. And in alchemical language, Q is the quintessence or the fifth element, the ether. So, like you just said, Masonry is about achieving and creating something where you're working physically in our realm, but it's multidimensional, like you said.
Yep.
You're functioning in 3D, but operating in 4D.
Which
5D.
is alchemy.
100%. That's transmutation.
Yeah.
And that's why when we talk about spelling and grammar, grimoire and spells, it's all completely intertwined. It's the same thing. It's no different than physically creating a building, because the building is just, like you said, it could be a vocal representation in solid form. And yeah, it takes you to the Phoenician thing again. It takes you to alchemy. It's all the same thing. And when you study Solomon, it gets super interesting because you mentioned Lord of the Rings already. You know, I'm a huge Tolkien guy. And when you study the ring, you know, what did Solomon wear? You know, what was the most famous thing he had? The ring. And what did the ring do? It controlled all of the jinn who did everything for him. Right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry,
don't be.
I have to cut in. If you know, R and the L, they always switch, right?
Yes.
Across languages.
Q's and P's.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Q's and K's. Sorry, go ahead.
You have the R and the L, you know, pretty much when you go right hemisphere to left hemisphere of the brain and the world, you go from R to L, right, left, blue shift, red shift, right?
Absolutely.
Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
Saruman,
Mm-hmm.
Saruman. And if you're gonna flip Sauron too, well, number one, they're both Saturnian archetypes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn rules Capricorn, the builder, right? It rules Libra, the scales, and the blah blah blah. You have, if you want to flip Sauron too, you get Solon, right? And Solon is pretty much our only authority on Atlantis.
Yeah.
Solon, however you want to pronounce
Interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah.
I mean, so to make another
rings on rings, you know, concentric rings.
Definitely. And man, I completely forgot where I was going to go with that. But
articles.
Yeah, I guess I could just.
What a rabbit hole we're in right now. This is crazy.
Oh yeah, it's fabulous. Language is so important, and
we'll have to. Sorry, we'll have to do a whole separate video. Get back together and do something on Tolkien.
We'll have to go on my show.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'll put this out on my show too, but I'm saying we'd have to do.
Tolkien's maps are a direct overlay of America.
Wow. See, I've never heard that.
I mean, again, I don't want to use the word. I don't want to be direct is the wrong word because it's not direct. But all of those lands, dragons were real, and America was known as the land of the Drake. Right. This is where Quetzalcoatl comes from. You know, not only was he the god of the air, death and rebirth through fire.
Sir Francis Drake, right?
Sir Francis Drake. I could go all day about just Drake and, you know, his purpose, and Queen Elizabeth. We're going to get into Queen Elizabeth and how she ties into old world Assyria, old world Egypt, old world Mississippi, right? The Nile is the Mississippi. The Gulf is the old world. Canada is Canaan. We can go on and on, right?
Wow.
But yeah, let's get back into the article here. Right. Tolkien's amazing. It's all tied in. World of Warcraft, you know, I'm sure you know the game, but
dude, even Skyrim, even fucking Skyrim is OP with all this stuff.
The continent on the right hand side of the World of Warcraft map, when you flip it, it fits America literally perfectly. I'll get the article pulled up. I did a mirror of it, but yeah, it's all, again, going back to what you said about the ether. You know, why was Avatar such a hit? It's subconscious.
It speaks to us, yeah.
It speaks to us.
But again, it goes back to their cinemagicians where they want to emulate again the. It goes back to, I hate to keep bringing it back up, but the Renaissance, they modeled everything after man, right? The Vitruvian man. Vitruvius is the guy and he was a Pythagorean, and he's the one that talked about it. So of course they're going to emulate the perfect form, which is, I mean, it's sexist, but man, right? The shape of man. You have Leonardo with the whole thing, but they wanted to emulate that. So by emulating the world and you know the real stuff in a fictional. We go back to transmutation, where they're transmuting fiction into reality in some sort of way. And I relate this to the Chariot card in the Crowley deck, where he's the Full Metal Alchemist, and that orb, you know, he's birthing reality into existence. But I'm not gonna get into all that. But I'm just saying it all goes back to alchemy at the end of the day, and it's bananas. So they wanna, of course, they're gonna make a fake game world modeled after the real world, because again, it's that mirroring of realities in a way.
It's Joseph Campbell. I mean, are you familiar? Yeah. So I mean, any Hollywood director, producer, cinematographer is going to know who he is, and they're going to base most of their stuff on him, because that's just the fundamental reality of the hero with 1,000 faces and archetypes. It's subconscious. It's just like the muse, you know. It seems kind of lost on the populace, but then it goes back to what we were talking about, you know, dealing with not just your third dimension but upper dimensions, and keeping everyone fixated on the lower dimension is really important, because it's just like the taking the glasses off, you know, or red pill. I hate to use that term, but you get the idea. Once you become, you know, self-reliant on your information, everything changes. You can never go back. You know, once you hold yourself accountable for whatever it is you're eating, you're reading, you're watching, you know, it's all so important, and it really does craft not just the person but the society. And this goes back again. You mentioned Crowley, and I know you love Homunculus. Well, I mean, who wrote more about them than him? And his stuff is, you know, it's pretty uncomfortable subject once you get into what he was doing with them. But yeah, it's all wrapped up into the same thing, and we're dealing with things beyond our visible spectrum. But again, as most people are already aware, that's such a small fraction of what's really going on. But yeah, I'll get back into the articles here before I get to. Here's another picture of Tenochtitlan. And I'm just going to kind of summarize. Basically, he's going over what philosophers said and extrapolating on the runes of Tenochtitlan. You guys familiar with the Olmecs? Kind of on a surface level, right? Mm-hmm. But to go another level, you were kind of already mentioning that people were drawn to areas and they just felt like they had to build some kind of monument or structure, right? Well, the Olmec, and this is where the story of consuming the flesh of Christ comes from. Well, what was Christ to the Olmec was mushrooms. So the Olmec in ceremony would consume mushrooms. And in the mushrooms, they could see the telluric currents or the ley lines of the earth. And they called it the serpent, or they referred to it also as Quetzalcoatl, but they didn't really have a name for it. And they would follow them until they came to a conjunction where multiple lines, you know, crossed each other. And that was where they would build a city or a monument or a structure of some kind. Wow. And all the major cities of Mexico follow this. And San Lorenzo, if you keep stacking concentric rings around Tenochtitlan, one of the rings is San Lorenzo, which is a city outside of Mexico City. And they called it one of the, you know, major cities of the Olmec. They found Olmec heads there, which Olmec heads in themselves are incredibly fascinating. You know, basalt is one of the hardest stones in the world, so to act like someone chiseled these rocks is a joke. Not only the fact that they come from hundreds of miles away, and what do they think they just rolled them there? And that's total nonsense. Well, you study the Olmec enough, the Olmec don't call themselves Olmec. That's a name given to them by authors in the 1800s, 1700s. Mayan culture is just Olmec culture. They created the Mayan to separate two distinct people. So the Olmec called themselves the Z people, XI. And what's really interesting is you can trace that group to China, where they become or already are the Z dynasty. And people like Buddha, remember Buddha's mother was Maya. The roots of Buddha exist in Mexico. The Olmec of the Z dynasty, this is going to get you your Mongolian phenotypes, where we're told the yellow races of today, but really the leading people in China and Japan pre 1500, 1400, 1300s were dark skinned. Confucius was a dark skinned person. All of the great philosopher types of China were black. And you can trace these same people to Mexico. Okay. So essentially what this person is saying is that the stories the Mayans tell is that in some kind of catastrophe, right? We're told, and you went over this in your documentary, Atlantis didn't sink below the sea. It was the people that were there were killed or went somewhere else, and it was lost from sight or vision. It wasn't gone. And parts of it maybe, certainly. Sea level rose. Basically what he's talking about is translating that their stories, that the Phoenicians or whoever, it's Phoenicians, because remember, Phoenician is a relatively new term. To these people, they call them the sea people. But that's the thing with sea people, is they were white, long-bearded sea people. You know, this could be your Helsinki types, right? Or you had, because the Phoenicians were a whole conglomerate of people, it was everybody, just like Atlantis. There wasn't just one group of, one phenotype. I hate using race. Skin color is a new thing. Well, one phenotype didn't exist. So that's why the person, I believe, is saying whoever. Anyways, they transfer the Aztecs from the east, which I think is Florida. It's not from Africa. You know, Mauritania and all those places in Africa that people keep theorizing, the Mediterranean, the Azores, that's been completely disproven. And again, that's my opinion. So they came from Florida, which is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. And he goes into the different translations that come from the Mexican language. I've sent you this article, which I hate that it keeps doing that. But basically, this person shows that through the study of the Greek language, which we've talked a little bit about, but Greek and Roman and Latin, these are all inversions of languages that existed here. So that's going to be a hard pill for people to swallow. But European history is completely false, just like American history. Mm-hmm. So people that are stuck on the Greek language and all of these things, Etruscan history. Etruscans are Olmecs. They came from Mexico or the Americas. I don't want to just say Mexico, the Americas. Because they were in Peru, they were in Mexico, they were in all the way up into Alaska. Anyways, his translations, he goes into how...
Can I read that one?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Out loud?
Yeah, whatever you want.
The utility. Well, let's start from the top. The study of the Greek language. Extract from a lecture by Professor C.
I think it's Plato.
Plato. Okay. The utility of knowing the Greek language increases as the Greek nation regains its political standing. The gradual extension of Grecian sway over the territory once usurped by the Turks causes a greater interest to be felt by foreigners for the acquisition of that speech. We would, however, overlook mere motives of curiosity and adduce motives of solid mental utility in the study of Greek. Need I recall to your mind interminable array of Greek manuscripts and books whose thoughts belong to an ancient civilization? Let us confine in ourselves to one of these tangible data of Hellenic talent, but reason upon the language as upon a beauidial, which the mind colors with such hues as suit the modern epoch to which we are slotted. There is sufficient sublimity in the fact that the Greek has survived the reek of nations to give in that language a title of dignity and grandeur. Of all languages, Greek is the only one which has been a prominent medium of thought in all the great revolutions of the globe. Even in America, where freedom led the Anglo-Saxon form of democracy, the Greek tongue was called upon to disperse its terms and resources of popular technicality. The word commonwealth was not sufficiently consecrated by popular progress. The term republic was not. You want to finish it off? It's a little hard.
Was not sufficiently consecrated by popular progress. The term republic was not the ultimate tool of liberty's utopia, but the word democracy, redolent with Athenian and Spartan worth was the index of the Buell ideal to which America was destined to tend or lend? What are all the monuments of sculptured art compared with the monuments of society or policy? The thoughts of a nation build more lasting edifices than the wealth of plundered kingdoms can rear. A people by thought may build an edifice whose ruins will destroy them in the final shock of nations. What has become of the Egyptians, whose edifice was monarchism? They are lost, and their language brings to us nothing but the remnants of servility and superstition. The edifice of servility and the edifice of Greek policy was popular liberty. Its ruins crusted the invaders and sent the oblivion of the laws and languages to 30 nations. But did the rubbish destroy the Greek people? No. Behold them springing from the ruins of 2,000 years and rebuilding the edifice of a popular constitution. Their first revolution, after a bloody sacrifice of 8 years, gained them a republic. Hardly had they, by European permission, thank you, secured their independence, when European monarchism denied them a constitution. Then followed that revolution of words, which bloodlessly continued till 1644, not sure, when the Greek people perforce made their kings sign their charter. The envoys of kings remonstrated, but in vain. The Greek people stood in its majesty. The centurion, senator, chief, notaris, like a rock of ages, resisted the threats and complaints of monarchs. It was a victory of bloodless fame, a worthy offset to Salamis. If the actions of Themistocles gave to the Attic dialect its association with grandeur, has not the sage of 100 winters, the immortal notaris, given to the popular dialect an association with intellectual national glory? The popular dialect of Greece, the spoken language of the common people, is by such noble mind and action elevated to a rank in being by the refined Attic, the soft Ionic, and the majestic Doric. The deeds and saying of such men as notarists should be recorded in the true popular dialect of the time, a dialect asserted by Voltaire to be the most harmonious of all modern languages. It is natural that the Greek of present day should be so. The waves of conquest have dashed about it, and the commerce of all the great nations of earth plays among the isles of Greece. 100 languages are daily spoken in that babble of the sea, and that focus of intercourse. It is natural thereof that the Greek language should possess all the beauties of foreign tongues, both in sound and expression. The Greeks are nearly all able to speak 2, 3, or often 5 languages besides their own. They may be languages. They may be called the linguist's nation. May not their exercise of the mind in studying other tongues be the cause of the beauty of their own? It therefore is useful to an American to study this tongue, the key of all others. Even the languages of the American Indian bear Greek footprints. The Mexican words signifying God is Teotl, whose root is evidently the Greek theos. The western continent, named by Plato and the Egyptians Atlantis, and called the realm of Neptune in the works of the philosopher, could have been no other than America. The word Atlantis, compounded of 2 Mexican words, Atlantiscinco, meaning water god kingdom or Neptune's realm. The word Anahue, which denoted the empire of Montezuma, signifies near the water. But this name is not so ancient as that of Atlantis. Plato asserted that the Atlanteans were very warlike and also very ambitious to annex other countries to their own. They conquered Africa to the confines of Egypt and Europe to the borders of Greece. After these gigantic strides to glory, they were sunk in the ocean in the midst of the shocks of a terrible earthquake, which lasted 9 days. Since that period, which was several centuries before Plato, no communications have existed between the eastern and western continents. The shoals and other dangers of the Atlantic had frightened seamen from that quarter.
Wow. That alone is just so many nails in the coffin right there.
It's from 1834.
Correct. Virginia.
Wow.
So most of my articles, I'll put the title, The Study of the Greek Language, Virginia, 1834.
That is extraordinary.
Can I ask you real quick, because I love this type of stuff. I love reading old texts, grimoires, etc., etc. How do you begin? Is there a tool that you use for this? Because I find it so funny where there has been literally reptilian articles of, you know, underground cities and all this stuff. And have you seen if they go in there and censor stuff at all, or like how does that work when you're navigating through these old? Because they're like newspaper scans, right?
Yeah. Every state has their own archive, and every country has their own archive. So I use my own local state archive, which is really amazing, especially when I'm like looking for something specific in my own state. But I use archive.org. I use Gallica. I use Library of Congress. But yeah, you can just, if I'm looking for something specific, let's say Florida, and I'm not having any luck on a congressional level, I'll go state level. I've been doing it so long now, it's really easy. But yeah, you know, AI, it's a funny thing because I've spent so much time on these digital archives that you can see that it has changed. Like I can look up a specific phrase or specific set of words, and they won't give me the same results twice. And as time goes on, the results get less and less. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily censoring, because you can search the same phrase 10 times and get different articles. It's really weird. Either there's some kind of nefarious, I don't even want to say that. There's some kind of algorithm to it, whether it's purposeful or not. But yeah, I like you were saying, grimoires, from astrology to magic to language, especially language was my big one. The older you go, the better. And that's the same with any of these texts. America, especially on a congressional level, didn't start keeping records of newspapers until right after 1776. So like the first real archived newspapers are from 1777. And it's really thin. There's not much, obviously, because the more states get added to the union, the more information gets put onto the archive. Also, there was not much to America as we know it in the late 1700s. The Louisiana Purchase and everything west was terra incognita still. There was a bunch of savages, right? But, they knew better than that. So are you guys now, slowly learning that they knew exactly what was here, and they were just keeping it all under wraps. But yeah, those sources I just listed will get anyone buried for months and months. Gallica Archive, Library of Congress. You could look for years. I mean, I've got 5 years of this and 20,000 or so clippings and 6,000 posts.
It's Battlestar No, not Battlestar Galactica. You said Galaga?
Gallica. It's a French website. Yeah. It's a good one. It's a little glitchy just because cross country URL stuff is a little
I got you.
Glitchy, but it's still great. They have some of the, if you like old books, what you're talking about, that's where I would start.
Got 797,000. I'm gonna mute you, Longo, if you want to blow your nose, bro.
This hurricane is kicking up all these allergies. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. I'm just saying I can mute you if you want, so you can blow your nose in peace.
I'll mute myself, Dad. Okay.
All right. So if you want, I'll bring up your screen and then you can take it from there. I was just curious because I know I prefer a physical copy of a book. I know Longo's familiar with books and he can appreciate them, but I don't have the room or the money sometimes because the books do get expensive and they take up a lot of room. So I like having a PDF copy, but you also run the risk of having something altered or not have power in order to access it. So again, that's just
Yeah, I
part
mean,
of the
my
game.
my you know, my nickname's Analog. I kind of just you chose that because I was, wanting to, you know, before when I first had kids, I lived on a farm for 10 years, and I didn't really have internet. I didn't have television, and yeah, I was trying to get away from electronics, and I definitely preferred having a physical copy, like you're saying. But I've filled so many bookshelves, and the reality is, AI is your friend when it comes to doing work like this, where you're trying to segment something down and make it digestible for a bigger audience. People have a hard enough time today reading. Like you can look at your analytics, and my pictures, like a picture here of Tiwanaku, is going to get 1,000,000 times more views than an article about how it's related to Atlantis, which is really sad, but it's just the world we live in, especially social media. But yeah, digital is great because it cuts my, I don't have a lot of time. Sounds like you have kids. I have 3, and I work full time, and
Yeah.
it's crazy here. So
I feel your pain, bro.
Yeah, I need a way of filtering, because I can't flip through all my books. I mean, I did that in the past, and it was just ridiculous. So, so yeah, and yeah, you see things get changed, but I save all of my articles, on my own hard drive. So I have everything backed up, and I haven't seen anything change, like in a newspaper or papers get clipped. I truly feel in some way or another that all these digital archives are purposeful. Seek and you shall find. The answers for anyone that are looking are always there. It's just, are you going to put in the time and go looking for it?